Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Art Gallery. My name is Larry Cantor. I'm the chief curator here, and it's my pleasure to serve as today's Master of Ceremonies. But before introducing our distinguished speaker today, Dr. John Carpenter, I would like to call attention to what I hope you've all discovered on your own already, the beautiful installation of the private world of Surimono, Japanese prints from the Virginia Shawn Drosten and Patrick Canadian collection that Sadako Oki, our Japan Foundation Associate Curator of Asian Art, has organized on the second floor of the Kahn building directly above us. Sadako planned her installation, which I can selfishly say is incredibly beautiful, around two separate themes. People and genre scenes, which is up now, will remain on view through Sunday, March 15th, and will be replaced by nature and still life from Tuesday, March 17th through May 31st. Please don't miss either installation. These delightful and exquisite small woodblock prints were privately commissioned, as you will hear shortly, I'm sure, by poetry groups and kabuki enthusiasts in the early part of the 19th century in Japan. They require patience and concentration to appreciate, and they repay many times over the effort that you put into viewing them. The opportunity to share with you this truly splendid collection comes to us through the exceptional generosity of the collectors of Virginia Shawn Drosten and Patrick Canadian, Yale class of 1970, got it right? Their passion and sustained interest in these gem-like works of art and the literary wit and sophistication that lie behind their creation has grown steadily with years of deep intellectual commitment. On behalf of everyone here at the gallery, I would like to extend our warmest and most heartfelt thanks for their inspired generosity in sharing nearly 300 carefully selected works with the students of this university and the larger community we serve, as well as with, this is the important part, as well as with people everywhere who use this museum as a haven in which to study and appreciate fine art. Thank you, Patrick and Shawn. I'm also delighted to announce that the catalog of Shawn and Patrick's collection, authored by Sadako Oki, is just arrived, fresh off the press. We had an image of it before, and will be available in the lobby during the reception following this afternoon's talk. I am told at a 20% discount for everyone today only. That's a shameless promotional interjection. Sadako, who sadly could not be here today, has asked me to thank on her behalf a number of people without whom this publication and installation could not have happened. Adam Halliburton, Adam, thank you, a PhD candidate in the Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures here at Yale, wrote entries and provided sophisticated translations of poems that added an unmistakable flair to the catalog. Our editorial department, headed by Tiffany Sprague, our graphic designer Chris Sloboda, and photographer Richard House, whose job was particularly difficult, made certain the catalog was of a level of quality and beauty worthy of its subject. Our installations crew and Sadako's Asian department colleagues, Denise Leidy and Ami Potter, are people I would like to have thanked even if Sadako had not asked me to do so. But now it's my privilege to introduce today's speaker. Dr. John T. Carpenter, the Mary Griggs Burke Curator of Japanese Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, my former mailing address. John began his scholarly career as a specialist in Japanese language and literature, receiving a doctorate from Columbia University before moving on to art history and writing a dissertation on the courtier and calligrapher Fujiwara no Yukinari. He taught the history of Japanese art at the School of Oriental and Asian Studies at the University of London and served as head of the London office of the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Culture before moving to the Metropolitan Museum in 2011. He has published widely on Japanese art, especially in the areas of calligraphy, painting, and woodblock prints, including 2 books, I understand, specifically on Surimono. Since arriving at the Met, John has overseen numerous exhibitions and helped to write and edit many exhibition catalogs, including Designing Nature, the Rinpa Aesthetic in Japanese Art of 2012, The Poetry of Nature, Edo Paintings from the Fishbein Bender Collection, 2018, and most recently, The Tale of Genji, a Japanese classic illuminated, just last year, wasn't it? Just last year. John's talk today is entitled Surimono, Text and Subtext in Japanese Poetry Prints. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carpenter.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'd like to also add my thanks to so many people that made this exhibition, catalog, and today's event possible. First and foremost, I want to thank Sadako Oki. She's been talking about this exhibition project, catalog project for many years. And I know she's so excited that the catalog has arrived. Also, congratulations to Adam Halliburton, because I just received a copy of the catalog, and I was skimming over lunch today the translations of the poems, and they look elegant, witty, accurate, and so I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibition again with the catalog in hand. It adds another layer of enjoying the prints. Also, I'd like to thank my former colleague Denise Leidy, Ami Potter, Liz Harnett for making me feel so welcome here today. And then, of course, Sean and Patrick, this is an amazing accomplishment, and you are to be congratulated for finding a wonderful home for these rare and precious prints where they can be studied by students and enjoyed by the general public for many years to come. And I also have to thank my colleague, Joan Mervis, because as I was reflecting on this presentation, I realized that I could also look at this as an opportunity to reflect on my interaction with Surimono. Joan and I worked very hard on the Frank Lloyd Wright collection of Surimono, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was 25 years ago. And then I got to know Sean and Patrick. It was 20 years ago when the Ota Museum had the great exhibition of gems of Japanese printmaking, but the Japanese title said by 3 American women collectors. And I thought that was very interesting. And of course, Sean was one of those. And in 2008, I worked on a Surimono exhibition at the Rietberg Museum in Zurich. And we published a catalog then with a number of young scholars, and I think it reflected the state of the art of the field at the time in Surimono studies. Now I reflect that since then there have been 3 PhD dissertations on the subject, and that's quite remarkable. And Dan McKee, Don Koch, and now in Leiden, and Kit Brooks now at the Freer Sackler Museum are doing groundbreaking work on this fascinating area of Japanese printmaking. Purpose of my talk today is to encourage people to go up to the exhibition, look at the prints in a more leisurely fashion, buy the catalog, read it, study it. And I'd just like to give a little bit more context to the material. What brought about the phenomenon of surimono? What was the worldview that enabled this remarkable collaboration between ukiyo-e artists and poets? Something happened at the end of the 18th century, and it wasn't just in this area of poetry and printmaking. It was across the board in Edo culture. Something happened. There was intellectual, creative, artistic ferment. And the poetry movement, and today I'm going to focus on the kyoka poetry movement, this popular form of 31-syllable verse. Young, upstart, samurai intellectuals, wealthy merchant intellectuals started a movement. It was a revival of an old form of witty poetry based on waka, court poetry. But it wasn't just looking back to the Japanese past. There were two rival ideologies at work here. We can call one Chinese learning, kangaku. The other could be called national learning or nativist studies. This is the kokugaku movement. But what we might not realize is that Japan as a country was being defined anew at the end of the 18th century. We take it for granted that there is such a thing as Japanese culture. But actually, intellectuals of this late 18th century period were trying to identify what Japan was. Now, if you were immersed in Chinese studies, the kangaku side of things, and some of the people who commissioned surimono were in fact interested in Chinese history, whether you have images of Chinese warriors, Chinese history. A playful representation of the 8 immortals of the wine cup, a traditional theme of these Tang Dynasty scholars, and even Li Bai is included in this roster. And this, of course, is the way that you see it represented by ukiyo-e artists working in collaboration with kyoka poets. Tane Bunsho, around the same time, 1828, he is adhering to a more sinophilic approach to depicting the very same subject. So this is a Chinese way of looking at the world. And as you compare these two prints on view upstairs, you can see that we have the poets and the artist Gakute collaborating to create, it's a triptych, there are 3 in the set, of a comparison of flowers. Now, what are the flowers here? Well, for those who love the Chinese history, of course, you have the Yangui Fei, Yohi Sakura, the cherry blossoms of Yangui Fei And here we have the Komachi Zakura, which is Ono no Komachi. We have one of the four beauties of ancient China, Yang Guifei, the femme fatale, who caused the emperor to be so distracted that he lost his empire. And then we have the 9th century poet, Ono no Komachi, representing Japanese beauty. And you can see how the different images of Chinese beauty and Japanese beauty are represented in the world of surimono. But something else is going on in these prints. They're accompanied by the poems which I referred to as kyoka, literally mad verse. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to read what I wrote back in 1995 at the beginning of my essay. I think it still holds true. While most surimono, privately published Japanese woodblock prints of the late 18th and early 19th centuries were printed with one or more of the 31-syllable humorous poems called kyoka, it was their delightful images and exquisite printing techniques that first caught the eye of Western collectors such as Frank Lloyd Wright, who could not read their playful texts. Likewise, the primary appeal of surimono for modern collectors, like Sean and Patrick, and also for Japanese collectors, the primary appeal lies in their images, which can be enjoyed without an understanding of the literary context that gave them birth. Nevertheless, an appreciation of poems on surimono can in some cases actually alter or deepen one's perception of the artist's design. Conversely, the reading of the poems is likely to be affected by the accompanying images. Sometimes the artist adds a level of visual punning that gives an unexpected twist to the poem. Even when the verses are conventional New Year greetings or jocular word puzzles with no direct relationship to the image, the process of reading inscriptions allows one to pause over a print, to hold it longer in the hand or in the eye. For such is the allure of surimono. Out of all proportionate to their diminutive size and occasional nature, they contain a bounty of subtle meanings and pleasures that are best savored at a leisurely pace, or, more ideally, by repeated tastings. But in my presentation today, I would like to focus on the kokugaku side of things, the Japanese history, literature, culture referred to in surimono. Surimono go right back to the beginning of recorded history in Japan. I've always loved this print. If you look at it closely, you have to go up and see the gaufrage, the technique for creating this print. And then when you learn that it was Emperor Yuryaku, you say, oh my gosh, who was he? Well, one of these legendary emperors of Japan. He was on an outing in the mountains of Katsuragi. His bodyguard, his attendant, didn't go along that day. And he was attacked by a wild mountain boar. And the emperor, recognizing how strong he was, managed to subdue the boar. Well, as the story is recounted in the Nihon Shoki, in the Kojiki, these ancient chronicles of Japan that are parallel to the Chinese dynastic histories, Well, we learned that he went back and he tried to punish his attendant for not being there when he was attacked. We learned that the empress saved the day and told the emperor to be lenient. And so we have this very important historical episode recorded in a surimono. I never knew who this was by exactly. I always assumed it was by Gakute. I thought it was for the year of the boar. And then more recently, I've seen up at Harvard, these images are not from Yale. These are from Harvard University, the blurry ones here. It's from a set of 12 zodiac animals, and marvelous series. Now, Sean, was this your first acquisition, or was it another one that... I think back at the time of the Ota exhibition, I remember, Sean, when I asked which was the first print, and I think it was this one that you said was your very first print. And I think it's absolutely wonderful print. I like it as well. Of course, it shows a scholar's tokonoma, alcove, the accoutrements, the inkstone, the books, the Tanzaku poetry cart. But most remarkable is the portrait of Kakinomoto Shitomaro hanging here in the alcove. For those of you who know the legends of Shitomaro, he was recognized as the patriarch of Japanese poetry. He was the subject of so many portraits. And we know from records that even the Kyoka poets of the late 18th, early 19th century, when they had their regular poetry gatherings, they would often, in fact, hang a portrait of this 7th, early 8th century master poet in their alcoves, just as we see here. We know this was created for the year of the rabbit, 1819. Interesting, once you look at it, to study these poems will reveal how Kyoka operates. Kyoka, as I mentioned, derives from ancient court poetry, waka, 31 syllables, written in 5 lines of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllables, respectively. What differentiates Kyoka from waka is its abundant use of wordplay and also taking on subject matter that you could never have had in the Heian court. You couldn't take popular theater, for instance, everyday events, much less activities of the demi-monde. But Kyoka poets were very erudite. These were great intellectuals. They had studied their Japanese classics. And when you look at the poems and you can see them translated in the catalog, and just looking at each one, honobono to, honobono to, honobono to, all of the literature students in the room instantly recognize that this is the beginning of Shitomaru's most famous poem. Shitomaru wrote the Honobono to Akashi no ura no Asa Kasumi. Okay, something's wrong, right? The Kyoka poet had changed the asagiri, the autumn mists, to kasumi, which are spring mists. And each ending of each poem plays with this famous Shitomaru poem, and in a delightful way, plays with the classics, but it's not a parodic poetry in the sense of spoofing, it's actually showing respect. Shinrate was the head of the Manji poetry circle, and that's what you see, this motif here, reverse swastika form, is the emblem of the Manji group. What I didn't realize until about 30 minutes ago, I never, ever, this is the only impression I know of this print, I was just glancing through the catalog, and through some kind of remarkable photography, somebody was finally able to read most of the inscription here on this plaque. I just read this a half hour ago, but do you know what this says? This says that this is a portrait of Shitomaru by Fujiwara no Nobuzane, an early Kamakura artist. Now, of course, it's a rubbing made from that portrait, but this is a remarkable, and then it also mentions that it was owned by one of the poets. So this is a remarkable document. I didn't know about this until a half hour ago, and this is a wonderful contribution to the scholarship on this print and to Surimono studies in general. Well, as you can see, on the surface, these might seem like very simple, enjoyable, accessible prints. But gosh, any of the literature students who want to test your skills at analyzing literary references, for instance, the early Heian Tosaniki, and Tosaniki, you'll remember, was a diary that was written in the voice of a woman by a male courtier. But when you look at this print, it tells us it's based on the Tosaniki, the Tosa diary. And this is so confusing the first time you look at it. But it turns out that it's actually a direct quotation. And for those of you who are interested in textual studies, take a look at the textual variants used by these scholars. This is slightly different than the standard edition that's used now. And so I thought that the transcriber had made a mistake. No, it turned out a little bit more sleuthing around. It turns out that this is one of the accepted variants. Well, I won't dwell on this kind of linguistic intricacies, but imagine that you've received this print. You're pretty smart yourself. You're part of the national learning movement. You've read your classics, and you see this here. You'll know exactly where it comes from in the Tosa diary. You'll know that it's this phrase, and this is what it means. And then you'll know it's followed by a spring poem that's perfectly suited to a surimono. And then the poet goes and adds his own spring poem. Now, we did the Tosaniki, so let's get up into around the year 1000. Early Heian period still. You all know what's going on there, early 11th century. The greatest florescence of women's literature in the history of Japan, not to be repeated again until the 20th century. And along with the tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, the other great literary masterpiece available now in 3 wonderful translations is the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon. And this particular print, part of a series of great female literary figures, captures a moment from the Pillow Book. It's that episode where the Empress Teishi is just saying good morning to Sei Shonagon, and she's asking, how's the weather? But in this very rarefied atmosphere of the palace, you don't just say good morning, what's the weather like? the empress said, "How is the snow on the peaks of Shenglu?" And then Seishonagon doesn't want to just give a simple answer. She goes to the window and she lifts the blinds without saying anything. And of course, what she's alluding to is a poem by Bai Zhui, where raising the blinds, I gaze out at the snow upon the peaks of Shenglu. Now, this is all encapsulated here in this wonderful, wonderful print created by Hokke. You can study the history of Japanese literature just through Surimono. And I didn't know this print, or I had forgotten that I'd seen this print, and because it's a very, very rare print by Hokusai. You know, he's Fusenkyo Iitsu. Hokusai started to use these variant names. Iitsu literally means to become age one again. So when he turned 60 years old, Hokusai had been through the entire cycle of the years, the East Asian zodiac years, and the various cycle that takes a full 60-year cycle. So he was starting all over again. But it has this very distinctive characteristics of after he turned 60. And that is, notice this and see, this is a reference to Makura no Soshi. This is the pillow book of Seishonagon that I was just referring to. And here we have a courtesan being depicted. And she's being depicted as a poet, as well-read, as literate. Oops, sorry. Now, I've given you the pillow book. Oops, let me go back here. I've given you the pillow book of Seishonagon. Now we enter into the early medieval period. Oops, sorry, let me point this back here. Let's pause here for a second. Essays in Idleness. Brilliantly translated by Donald Keene. If you've never read it, please give it a try. It's a literary miscellany written around 1330. And this particular series takes excerpts from the text and then recontextualizes them. And here it's just talking about the delight of a feast with wines and cakes or the like served from behind a curtain of state. So you're in a court setting, and you can imagine how wonderful this is. And then this tour de force of design, of printing, of coloration, to show a contemporary view of sweets being prepared on a lacquer tray. They bring it into modern times. On one level, the theme is from a 14th century literary classic. On another level, it's brought up to date. Becomes even more meaningful when we remember that the head of the poetry group, Shinrate, he was actually a wealthy merchant. And what did he do for a living? He sold sweets. He was a confectioner. So you can approach these prints at so many different levels. And one of my very favorite prints of all time, Kintaro and a carp. It's the one I asked Sadako to use as the promotional image. And it's not just because my nickname for my whole childhood was Carp. I think it's a very dynamic image that in so many ways nicely encapsulates what Surimono can accomplish. Of course, you have the dynamic image of Kintaro from popular legend, wrestling with a carp, a symbol of a boy or young man aspiring to be an adult man, climbing the waterfall, the carp that will become a dragon, a symbol of achievement for a young man. The calligraphy of the kyoka here is not in the normal script of a professional scribe. This is Shibayan Moritsuna's own handwriting being reproduced here, which is unusual, but when it happens, it's very nice. The poem makes no sense whatsoever. Makes a good soup, so they say about a carp, as it leaps wildly about while the tresses of willow are tousled in the wind. What could that mean? Well, the confusing Atsumono ni naru, it is said, cho, turns out that's also from Tsurezure Gusa, the essays in idleness that I've just mentioned. And if you read the whole passage, it says, well, carp it makes a good soup, and the reason you drink it is so that your sideburns don't get all tousled like the willow here. And what's the connection between carp soup and keeping your sideburns carefully groomed? Well, of course, carp, according to Kenko Hoshi, the author of the Literary Miscellany, he just points out that, well, isn't it obvious that since Nikawa glue is made from carp, that means if you drink carp soup, your sideburns will stick to your face properly. So it's humorous on this fantastically erudite and recondite level, but it all works together very nicely. The dynamic composition, the artist responded to the poem. And so even the waterfall feels like the willow, the tresses of the willow. And similar compositions continue to be made through the end of the Edo period. Well, now I'm really exhausting your patience on the humor, the wit behind some of these inscriptions. Now, you're told right away that this is the Tsurezure Gusa, the Essays in Idleness. So written this way, Tsurezure Gusa, Essays in Idleness. And this is another rather confusing story. He believed that radishes were an unsurpassed panacea. So this constable ate 2 radishes every day of his life. But what does that have to do with the image that the artist Hoke created? Well, if you read the original excerpt where you learn the story that the constable ate 2 radishes every day, and this he thought would make him healthy. But one day he was attacked unexpectedly by 2 warriors. They came and attacked his cottage, and he didn't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, completely unexpectedly, 2 soldiers appeared and fought off these bandits. And he said, well, who are you? And it turned out that these soldiers that had appeared miraculously were the incarnations of the 2 radishes that he had been eating every day of his life. And so he is safe. And so the moral of the story is be faithful to radishes and they'll protect you in the end. There's a level of humor. It's erudition, but a level of wit and humor. And upstairs, you can see there are 5 out of 6 of this wonderful series that demonstrate that the samurai intellectuals who are members of the Kyoka movement did often commission prints that celebrated the samurai traditions, but at the same time connected samurai culture with elite literary output. And in this case, you'll see the bouquet Rokasen. The Rokasen are the great 6 poets of the Heian period, enumerated in the Kokinshu, the collection of poetry, ancient and modern. But here, they've created 6 famous warriors as famous poets. And you will find samurai poets commissioning prints. This is a particular famous one where you have Ushiwaka Maru, future Yoshitsune, in a game of backgammon, Sugoroku, with Benkei. And usually you'll remember the images of Benkei and Ushiwaka Maru, the young warrior fighting on Gojo Bridge in Kyoto. But here we have a very different type of scene. The young, handsome, teenage warrior has just defeated the older, burly, angry, more experienced warrior, Benkei. And he's grasping his fist in anger, and you can see that the poem is playing on these themes. And there's a level of literary punning and visual punning going on. The kobushi, the clenched fist, is actually a term used in hawking. So you can have the idea that it's also alluding to the samurai pastime of hawking, and the hawk lands on his clenched fist, but he's showing his anger, but then it allows the poet to segue into the image of a hawk that appears in a New Year's dream, which is one of the very common auspicious images found in New Year's poems. So marvelous print using brass, other metallic pigments, complex composition. It's really a tour de force of printmaking. I've been showing you works of high literary association, but just mention quickly in passing when you go up, you can also find wonderful surimono that celebrate a daily life. And you can have delightful scenes such as, sorry, I'm leaping ahead here. And examples, again, by Hokusai, his pupil Hokkei, just capturing delightful scenes of everyday life. But I don't want to miss another type of literary theme often found in surimono. That's kabuki surimono. And this is one of the most amazing prints, and it's on view upstairs right now. You've received this print. You're a big kabuki fan. And you get this print from one of your colleagues. And, well, you know it's for you, Shinjo Hiki Renshu. So presented to members of the Kabuki fan club. So you know that this is for Kabuki fans. And then when you look at it, you say, well, how do I enjoy this? Well, you say, oh, well, maybe this is a calendar print because you have all the, you have the long months represented. And so you say, maybe that's what it's all about. But in fact, what's wonderful, and it's displayed beautifully upstairs, is when you lift this particular curtain, literally lift it, and upstairs you'll see that how it's beautifully displayed. All of a sudden you see three of the most popular artists of the day. When I was reading it earlier, I took the Art Institute of Chicago's impression, which isn't as good, but you can see that it's torn off the curtain. They've lost the curtain. It was discarded. But it allows you to see the original poem and the three actors together. The interesting thing here is when we look at the poem more carefully, the actors, of course, we have the most famous Ichikawa Danjuro VII on the right, and in the middle, Onoe Kikugoro III. So you know that he's celebrating some very important artists and actors. But when we look at the poem, and it's easier to see here, Edo no Hana Nari. Now, those of you who study surimono will know that this name appears quite often. And variations of this name appear again and again. Well, because of the work of Tsuda Mayumi, we now know that this poet who called himself the flower of Edo, he wasn't shy, he wasn't modest. Well, actually, this is Mori Narimoto. He was the 12th daimyo of Choshu. And he became one of the foremost patrons of kabuki surimono. Absolutely deluxe, wonderful prints. The poem can be translated as the purple curtains of mist begin to part under the dawn sky. Their faces display renewed youth, these plum stars of the stage. So it's a wonderful New Year's surimono, a deluxe surimono, created by Mori Narimoto using one of his pen names. Now, we have to take into account the career of Kunisada. He was also a great actor print artist, great painter, and prolific surimono artist. He inherited from his master, Toyokuni I, this ability and fascination with capturing the performances and the appearances of the great actors of the day, especially Danjuro. And if I had to select my favorite actor print by Toyokuni, by Kunisada, I think I would settle on this print showing Ichikawa Danjuro VII as Bodhidharma. Of course, Bodhidharma as the monk who transmitted Zen Buddhism to China. Here, the large eyes of Danjiro, the distinctive hooked nose, merge with well-known imagery of presentations of Bodhidharma with a cowl, hirsute, large eyes. The many parodies of Bodhidharma as a courtesan became common. There were links between the imagery of courtesans and Dharma, so that was very common. But we also see let me go back here just once to show you another instance where actually Danjiro did play a role where he wore a Dharma costume. But I was grappling with these poems. They're really tough, these kyoka here. And I saw, just before I came over, Adam's translations of the poems on this print. They're so much better than my own. I'm not going to go into any of mine except to mention that the wordplay for all 4 of these poems is really tremendous. One of them reads, "He should be called the head of the Zen sect, since he stares intently or keeps an eye on people of the world with those large eyes." And so the idea is Oyadama, who is famous for his large eyes as a kabuki actor, and it uses the vocabulary niramu, to stare intently, which is associated with the idea of the Mie pose, when all of a sudden Danjiro is on the stage and he almost looks at everyone cross-eyed, and everyone is frozen in the audience because of the power of Danjiro's large eyes. So here it's captured in this print and likened to Bodhidharma, but absolutely fascinating print. Now that I've seen Adam's translations, please go up and study this more carefully in the gallery with the translations in front of you. I'm adding this set of prints in here without having time to explain the funny poems on them, just to say, I think it's just such a wonderful set. I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to enjoy this set of 12. Very, very rare. I only know of one other set, but the fascinating example of what happens. You're not an Utagawa School artist. You aren't able to participate in the Utagawa School monopoly on actor prints, but you're asked to create an illustration to go along with a celebration of, in this case, the Abando family actor. You create a still life with actors' props. You don't show the faces. And this is why some of the most wonderful actor still life prints were created by Hokusai and his pupils. A very special work indeed is this. I just looked at it carefully just before I came here, and I think this is a marvelous still life print. So absolutely marvelous. A Hokkei signature. Do you know what this print is? this is celebrating the continuity of the greatest acting family in the history of Japan. This is the great Ichikawa Danjiro VII, using his poetry name here, Sanjo, announcing the birth of his son, Danjiro VIII. And I just cheated, and I saw Adam's translation here, the Kaomise. Kaomise is the debut, of course, of a kabuki actor, the Kaomise, showing the face. Well, this is the most wonderful face-showing event of any life, is to see a baby being born and his face being shown. And I didn't know how to interpret this until I saw Adam's interpretation here. The komochi to, but this also could be read as komoji to nari, edo no koi. This is interesting. He's announcing that there's going to be a new carp, a symbol of the Ichikawa family, arising. And he's making a pun on that you have a young baby being born, but also a great actor being born, and his idiosyncratic handwriting. But, baby clothes here, and this complex with the garments and works associated with the Ichikawa family of actors. A wonderful, wonderful print. And once again, a Hokusai school actor doing still life surimono that are related to performances, in this case, the shakuhachi in its case. I am looking forward to seeing this in the next rotation. I find it one of the most perplexing of all surimono prints. I still don't know to this day whether it's supposed to be a goldfish in a small aquarium or if it's inside glass painting of the type that you'd see in China. But these final works that I'm showing you of the still life genre are going to be central to the next rotation. So I encourage you to come back for the second rotation and also read about these in advance in the catalog. I would be remiss again if I didn't mention my very favorite kabuki, my very favorite surimono artist, designer, poet, National Learning Scholar, Kubo Shunman. Absolutely deep immersion in the classics, but at the same time he was part of this antiquarian movement where he was fascinated by objects. And here, for instance, he took this image right out of, oops, I'm skipping ahead. You can see that he took this right from the 1781 publication, the Soken Kisho, The Appreciation of Superior Sword Fittings, and it also had inro and other craft objects. This is Inaba Tsuru, but he is studying these manuals and then incorporating them into his designs. And I did quite a bit of work on Kubo Shunman many years ago, and fascinated why he would be interested in capturing the colors, the textures of, for instance here, tea wares. Or coming up in rotation 2, the most incredible surimono series ever created, in my opinion. The Butterfly album. And I wrote several years back, towards the end of his career, Shunman took this fascination with textures and tactility to its final test in various series treating natural themes commissioned by the Kasumiren. For instance, in the late 1810s, he designed and produced the series Gunsho Gafu, the Butterfly album, which includes 7 surimono that depict groups of butterflies and moths of every variety. For Shunman, Gunsho Gafu was in many ways the ultimate test of his skills as a designer and printer. How best to conjure out of the thick, soft hosho paper the delicate gradations of muted colors and harmonious color schemes seen in fluttering butterfly wings. How best to convey the sensory experience. The use of embossing, metallic colorants, burnished gold, in fact bronze, and silver, actually tin, harks back to decorated papers of ancient times festooned with dust and flakes of precious metals. Both ancient and modern artists knew that an elegantly textured surface can tease out the nostalgia for a mythical past. For Shunman and his colleagues, the past was to be sensed in a tactile experience here and now, whether this delectation of lavishly produced surimono, or the fondling of lacquerware or finely crafted objects, or the contemplation of the patina and exoticism of antiquities. An intense sensory response to forms and textures, natural or artificial, and to color and light, whether in reflection or in shadow, was crucial to their quest to reconnect with an imagined bygone age. Now, I would like to conclude with this marvelous, marvelous work that in so many ways encapsulates the tour de force production of surimono. This was done by Gakute. He was in Osaka. He had the best print producer in Japan at the time. Tani Seiko helped him produce this work. The surimono we've seen here caused me to reflect on what I wrote back in 1995 for the Frank Lloyd Wright catalog that I started my presentation with. I wrote that surimono are the product of imaginative and intellectual collaboration between an artist and one or more poets, rendered in the woodblock print medium through the skills of an engraver and printer. They were not sold, but exchanged as tokens of literary friendship and a shared appreciation of elegant things. Their intimate quality is confirmed by the extreme rarity of original editions of surimono, which is due to their limited distribution at the time of issue. Yet the fact that they were published at all betrays a desire to make a statement that transcends the amateur, exclusive, and ephemeral. These poets who commissioned these surimono, shared a knowledge of a long and distinguished literary tradition. While 31 syllables does not allow elaboration on literary themes, Many poems acquire depth through the use of allusion and association. References to classics that Surimono poets and artists made with such frequency and ease, analogous to references to Greek and Roman legends in English Romantic poetry, pose an undeniable obstacle to modern readers. Still, as I've pointed out in today's talk, the literary and historical references are usually to Japanese and Chinese classics that have now become part of world literature through excellent translations. Our enjoyment of Surimono will be enhanced by a greater familiarity with these sources. Conversely, a study of Surimono could amount to a wide-ranging, albeit eclectic, survey of pre-modern Japanese literature and culture. I wrote back in 1995, Surimono is an art of subtle harmonies between human beings and nature in the celebration of seasonal renewal and the commonplace objects of everyday life. The harmony between past and present in the evocation of old heroes, and the harmony between images that please the eye and text that tease the mind. I would like to invite visitors to the exhibition, readers of the catalog, to recompose these harmonies. Thank you very much. I'm also happy to take questions if I haven't taken up too much time already. Any questions from the students? Or sure, Sean.
Sorry. John, would you comment on why Surimono production petered out?
It's a good question. Okay. Yes, Kyoka Surimono did fall out of favor. I think there might have been financial reasons around 1830 or so, when you have a tempo period, famine, financial calamities. That's one real reason, I think. I think maybe a more important reason might be many of the young upstart intellectuals who carried the Kyoka movement in to the Bunka Bunsei period, so 1804 through the end of the 1820s. They got old and they died. The next generation was not as adept at taking up the Kyoka movement. It continued. There was a movement towards Haikai Surimono down in the Kansai area. But Kyoka Surimono had their heyday in the first 2 decades of the 19th century. And then after that, Kyoka books, often without color illustrations, but black and white illustrations, were created in great number, but they don't have the kind of dynamic printing techniques. So perhaps a combination of the decline of the poetry groups, when the two heads, Magao and Rokujuen, both died. I think that the heads of the poetry groups had been the intermediaries between the poets. Hokusai had already backed out of Surimono production and let his students take over, but they also some of the best surimono designers also died in the late 1820s and early 30s. There are probably a host of other contributing factors, but I guess those financial reasons, publishers having problems, and then perhaps lack of an audience to pay for them.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. You just mentioned Haikai Surimono. So is there a, chronologically one is, happen to over the other or concurrently happening?
They were concurrent. The interesting phenomenon here is kyoka had been produced in Japan from the 8th century onward. Even the Kokinshu has kyoka included. And you go through various periods in the history of Japanese literature when kyoka are more popular. What happened at the end during the Tenmei kyoka movement was you had a whole constellation of brilliant young intellectuals all contributing. Haikai, or what we call haiku now, the 17-syllable verse form, of course, is most famous in the medieval period as the opening verse of a whole series of linked verse. So that was produced straight through. Going back in them, there was actually Haikai surimono being created in the 18th century already. Something that perhaps is distorting the full story, and my colleagues in Kyoto and Osaka regularly chide me for being more interested in Edo surimono, created by ukiyo-e artists, rather than Haikai surimono, created by shijo artists. I hope, well, I'll say it in front of everyone. It's being recorded. I think the literary complexity of Edo, kyoka, surimono, and the technical prowess of the ukiyo-e designers and the printers in Edo is so remarkable and so endlessly fascinating that there's been more focus on that over the years than on Haikai surimono. But I'm looking forward to students in the room taking up the challenge of doing more work on Haikai surimono, and that would be a very welcome contribution to the field. There are some major collections in the States, and they should be studied and translated.
I'm curious about how the recipient of a surimono would treat it. So you've mentioned these are New Year's greetings, maybe akin to the New Year's postcards that people still send. If you received a surimono, I don't know if you would know this. I mean, was it displayed as a work of art? Was it more like a Christmas card? Was it framed in the home? How was it treated by the recipients?
Now, I think that the reason we still can create collections at this very late stage in history is because we're fortunate that there were enough people at the time when they received these every New Year, they actually saved them and sometimes put them in albums. So it would be similar to someone holding on to each year's stash of Christmas cards because they're beautiful. Now, in this case, there were clearly people who held on to them and held on to all of the ones they received. But so many of the prints that are on display upstairs, I mean, you can count on one hand the number of impressions that are known around the world. And so not everyone held on to them. And then keep in mind that Edo burnt down so many times, it would be almost, it's a miracle that we have as many as we do surviving. So what I imagine might have happened, it could have been two different circumstances at the time. Someone would come and deliver the New Year's surimono in person, or you would have a gathering where they would be exchanged and they would open them in front. So I mentioned Mori Narimoto, the daimyo Kyoka poet, he really wanted to show off his the deluxe surimono, that actor surimono that he commissioned. So I think that they were treated as something precious at the time they were circulated. They had the most important ukiyo-e artists creating them. So I think people did cherish them. And to the extent that they were cherished at the time, that means we have some today to enjoy. In Japan, they fell out of favor. Actually, ukiyo-e in general fell out of favor among collectors in Japan for a long while. And it's only in recent years that Japanese have a renewed interest in surimono. They were treated as being ephemeral. If there are no further questions, you all know what you have to do next and immediately. You have to acquire this fabulous catalog, view the exhibition again, and I hope in my comments today I've given you a little bit of incentive to look at the prints more carefully and enjoy them on various levels. Thank you very much.